السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته والحمد لله اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد بعدد كل ذرة ألف ألف مرة كما تحب وترضى يا الله يا أرحم الراحمين. It is wonderful seeing all of you and wonderful being in your very esteemed company. You know, in the year 1100, a group of Muslims traveled from Damascus all the way to Baghdad. And they went from Damascus to Baghdad for a single purpose, and that was to appeal to the Khalif in Baghdad that a tragedy has happened in Bilad al-Sham, in Palestine, in Palestine, known as the First Crusade. They traveled there for the purpose of informing the Khalif authority in Baghdad for assistance. We need help. Help us. What do we do in the situation? It didn't quite work. But then 9 years later, they went again. This time from Aleppo all the way to Baghdad to ask again, we need help and assistance. But this time, they went with a poem. The poem was by a man called Abu Muzaffar al-Abiwardi. The one who traveled was the Shafi Faqih of Damascus called Abasit Ahrawi. And they learned the poem of Al-Abiwardi and they read the poem aloud in the court in Baghdad. وَكَيْفَ تَنَعْمُ الْعَيْنِ مِلْءَ جُفُونُهَا الْأَفَوَاتٍ أَيْقَظَتْ كُلَّ نَائِمٍ وَإِخْوَانُكُمْ بِالشَّامِ يُضْحِي مَقِيلُكُمْ ظُهُرُ الْمَذَاكِ أَوْبَطُونَ الْقَشَائِمِ. And how can the eyes sleep? The poet says, at a time like this, that would awaken any sleeper. When your brothers are sleeping in Sham in the bellies of vultures, how can the eyes sleep? It was a word spoken that had a ripple effect, because the continuity of the words of Al-Abiwardi lead then for us as historians to a finding of a most remarkable text written, authored by Shafi'i Faqih, another one called As-Sulami. He wrote a book called Kitab al-Jihad. And in the book, like Fahd says about climbing upstream, the book said it's not just about the fact that we have lost Al-Quds. Al-Aqsa is gone to the Crusaders, not just about that. But the fact that these Crusaders began from Sicily and Spain and then Jerusalem, and now they have another agenda. Therefore, the root solution is not just to give money to help us. He said, no, we need to fix our problem. He said in his text that we have suffering from division in the Ummah. Because in Al-Andalus, the Christians of the north, in Leon, Castile, Navarre, Aragon, began to play at the division of the Muslims and further that division and give money to weaker states to fight against other states of the Muslims. We're going to solve the problem. We need to create institutions. And so it began, therefore. In decades after that, Nuruddin Zengi, rahmallah, began a process of thinking, well, how do we deal with this problem so that there isn't another crusade against us? We're going to prepare the Muslims. How do we do that? In his mind, he thought, we're going to build places like madrasas, institutions, not just places of learning Quran and Hadith and other things. But this time, there is a newfound study of Hadith. And so therefore he said, we want people to write books on Kitab al-Fada'il al-Damashq, Fada'il al-Quds, Fada'il al-Sham, the merits of Jerusalem, the merits of Sham, the merits of Damascus. Why? So that if you learn about the merits of those places, the virtues and values, you would feel more inclined to go and live and settle and defend and die there. It worked. And so you had these amazing scholars like Al-Wasiti, like As-Sam'ani, began to write books on Fadail al-Quds for the purpose of realizing that we need to think about the long solution. And how do you do that? In his mind, you have patronage, the paying of scholars, of people of poetry. In the time of Salah ad-Din, it wasn't just a man fighting a physical war. Behind Salah ad-Din were a whole array of poets. Ibn Qaysarani, Al-Isfahani, At-Tarabulsi, so many poets, so many names. And they're paid by the court to deliver a message. Beware of division. Beware of disuniting. Be strong against your enemies. Remain intact. Fear Allah. All of these things are themes coming out from those poems. Nuruddin Zengi, he emphasized, he in fact instructed a man called Ibn Asakir, a scholar, to write a voluminous text, more than 40 volumes, called Tarikh Dimashq, the history of Damascus. Why? Because he realized Crusaders have interest in Damascus. And he believed if you write the text on Tarikh Dimashq, it would allow Muslims to learn about why that place is important for us to defend. And it worked. So when Crusaders came to Damascus, Second Crusade, the Muslims fought in its defense because they relied in many parts on the text of Ibn Asakir. And they recounted the virtues of people like Yusuf al-Fildalawi, the old sheikh who died as a martyr. All of these things are illustrative of a point that Muslims thought about, not just feeding of people when that was of course needed, it had to be done. But the importance of thinking about how do we prevent a future crusade. We build programs, we train people, we raise, you had inscriptions. You know, it's interesting because in those days you had inscriptions on mosques and buildings. And inscriptions was like a billboard, it would told the message behind something. You had inscriptions on tombstones, like Balak and Al-Ghazi and Zengi were all called Mujahid, for example, on their tombstones. You know, Al-Baybars, the Mamluk Sultan against the Mongols, in his mosque outside of Cairo. The mosque, in fact, was built from the rubble of a church, Crusader church in Jaffa, to give a message that, you know, we're in control. All of these things were symbolic and purposeful, but it therefore allowed the Muslim to feel a sense of confidence in themselves and empowerment in themselves. Words spoken, actions taken. You know, I think the most remarkable thing for me about the power of words, of course, comes from the Quran. The Quran, of course, is a spring of the Ummah, the spring of the believers. And in the Quran, Fahd was mentioned the example of Fir'aun. It's true, it's so powerful. Because Musa alayhi salam, he says to Fir'aun, we are messengers, me and my brother, from Rabb al-Alameen, and arsil ma'ana Bani Israel. So send with us Bani Israel, so we're going to liberate Bani Israel. That's a primary first call, liberation. And even when Fir'aun says, you know what? How could you say such a thing when I'm catering for you? I've raised you as like my own son, provided food for you. You've lived in my house, all this stuff. And Musa says to Fir'aun, you remind me of these favors, and abadta Bani Israel, but you oppress Bani Israel. You remind me of the favors whilst you oppress Bani Israel. You know, in one of the surahs in the Quran, Surah Al-Ghafir, there emerges an amazing individual in Surah Al-Ghafir. And it's really worth reading it again, because maybe we missed the man in Surah Al-Ghafir. Al-Ghafir is unique for many purposes. It's the only surah in the Quran where Allah says, لِمَنْ الْمُلْكَ الْيَوْمِ, for whom is a kingdom today? That's Surah Al-Ghafir. Al-Ghafir is also unique for another purpose. And that is in Surah Al-Ghafir, you know, Allah says there was one man, and this man was a believer, يَكْتُمُ إِيمَانَهُ, who hid his faith. Meaning this man never spoke. didn't speak because he was scared to speak and therefore hid his faith. He was scared because Fir'aun was around. But then he had the courage to speak. Words spoken. And when he spoke, this man really spoke. Like when he spoke, he really spoke. So you have those in the Quran, those Ya Qawmi statements. Oh my people. Prophets say that. Ya Qawmi, Ya Qawmi. And Ya Qawmi is like saying, oh my people, I share the same food with. I eat with. I have the same dress code. I have the same cultural habits as my people. Oh my people. The one who said that the most in the Quran is this man who wasn't a prophet in Surah Al-Ghafir. This man. He said that the most 6 times, Ya Qawmi. But you know the first time he spoke, when he didn't speak ever because he was scared, he said, أَتَقْتُلُونَ رَجُلًا أَنْ يَقُولْ رَبِّيَ اللَّهِ. Would you kill a man because he says, my Lord is Allah? That's the first time the man spoke. Would you kill a man because he says, my Lord is Allah? The voice, the power of justice, the power of defense, the power of support against oppression, against injustice. The first time the man spoke. And all of his Ya Qawmi statements are illustrative of the fact he's concerned about his people. But the first time he spoke was speaking on behalf of those who are oppressed in the land. All of us are here for a very profound, unique purpose. And I'm so, like Dr. Ashim was saying, impressed by the ethos, the motto of human aid and advocacy. This is a chance for real deliverance and real change for the ummah. The fact that the climbing upstream, and it's interesting about that notion because you know Allah in the Quran says, فَلَقَتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَ وَمَا أَدْرَكَ مَا الْعَقَبَ. You don't climb the hill that is steep. And what is the hill that is steep? فَكُّ رَقَبَ or طَعَامٌ. You know, Allah says it is to free a person from bondage. But not just, of course, to free someone temporarily, but to let them see that freedom. Or to feed a person when you're hungry yourself. Yatiman the makraba, and a poor person from a family. And that is the hill that is steep. It's an effort. It's hard to do. But within, of course, all of this is the emphasis on not allowing ourselves to be disunited, to think about unity, to think about deliverance of people who are oppressed as a long-term goal. For that to happen, we have to think deeply about the importance of activism, the importance of speaking, the importance of courage, of advocacy. And as a man in Al-Ghafir is showing us, courage is not just the absence of fear. It is a triumphing over fear. It is the overcoming of fear. And this in fact is one example of that. May Allah increase all of you in immense goodness and make this event an event of great memory for all of us. And a chance for all of us to be, and you know, Fahim mentioned something beautiful about the fact that it's not as if we are, you know, the giving hand for those who are in need. It's more of the fact that what's happened so far in Palestine, that level of iman, the strength of faith, the saying in the most difficult situations of Hasbi Allahu wa ni'mal wakeel, of saying of Allah, that iman that we take for granted because it's easier for us. For them in that situation, that's learning for us. We're not therefore the ones who are giving those who are needy. We are the ones who are in need. And this is like the example of Musa alayhi salam, the same prophet of Allah, escaping Fir'aun, gets to Madian, and he finds these 2 girls and he's to help them water their sheep. But then Allah says he goes into the shade and he says, "My Rabbi inni lima anzalta ilayya min khairin fakir." My Lord, whatever you've allowed me to do of goodness, I'm desperately in need of doing it. All of us are poor and impoverished before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah give us a chance to do something great in His cause. Allahumma ameen. Jazakumullah khairan.